Hey kids, welcome to the Far Out Podcast. How you doing today? Well, I'm doing all right. Thank you for asking. And this morning, November 17th, I started my day off with some cold pizza. And the reason why I want to bring that up at all is because yesterday, on the 16th, I had a very friendly conversation slash debate with my friends about our favorite kinds of pizza. And I very confidently said that my favorite kind is Domino's pizza, that I love Domino's. And my friends gave me a little bit of guff because they were like, "Oh, how can you like that stuff? You know, it doesn't matter if you get pepperoni or cheese or supreme; it all tastes the same." You know, and to a certain degree, that's true. Domino's does have a very unique flavor unto itself, but for me, that's not a bad thing because that means that Domino's always tastes delicious. You know, whether I'm getting like they said, pepperoni or cheese or supreme, it always has that unique Domino's flavor to it that I really appreciate. And so, yeah, late last night, I got me some Domino's and had that as a late night snack, and that was a good way to cap off my day. And then this morning, I had some more for breakfast. I had some cold pizza, and that was a good way to start my day. And so, yes, kids, I ride or die with Domino's. I think they make some pretty good stuff. But the real way I started my day, the real kind of significant way, is that I started to read some scripture this morning, and I'm actually going through the book of Genesis right now because I'm trying to get through the Bible cover to cover, and I have a very interesting relationship with the book of Genesis because it is the book of the Bible that I think I've read the most, more than any other book in there. Uh, Romans might be up there as well, and also Job. But for me, Genesis is it's easily one of the books that I've read through at least 4 or 5 times already. Because as I said, I'm trying to get through the Bible cover to cover, and sadly, just being honest here, I've started that journey many times before throughout my life, and for one reason or another, I fall out of it. I'll get a few books in, and then I'll just stop. I get distracted, just life gets in the way. There's no good excuse. But again, that means that when I restart that journey, I restart at the beginning at book one, page one. So I've gone through Genesis at least 4 or 5 times now already. But I think I'm gonna do it this time. I'm serious. I mean it. I'm gonna actually get through the Bible cover to cover. It might take me a little longer than I intended to, but it's interesting. Despite me having read Genesis as many times as I likely have over my life, this read through in 2025 and beyond, this one is hitting me differently than previous times, and I'm not really sure why. But I was reading through chapters 32 and 33, and if you have some understanding of Scripture, even if you don't, part of the book of Genesis is that we follow this family that consists of these brothers named Jacob and Esau, and their various wives and their children and an uncle and whatnot. And this family is incredibly dysfunctional. Jacob and Esau have strife between themselves, so much so that Esau vows to kill his brother Jacob at one point. Jacob has many wives, and they themselves bicker and are very hostile towards one another. And then you have an uncle in there whose name is Laban or Laban, and he has tried to cheat the brothers for years. And this family, however you look at it, it's not working, and it's so dysfunctional and so hostile that the family decides they need to split up. And so Esau is going to take his family, his wives, his children, his livestock, and he's going to go one way, and then Jacob's going to do the same thing with his wives and his family, his livestock, and go the other way. And so they depart from one another. And then in chapter 32, Jacob receives word that Esau is coming to meet him, that they're going to cross paths once again. And Jacob is not happy about the idea of reuniting with his brother because, again, this family is so hostile towards one another that, as I said, Esau has vowed to kill Jacob. He's vowed to kill his own brother. And so Jacob thinks, oh my gosh, if I'm going to run into Esau, that means he's going to kill me. I'm going to die at my brother's hand. And so Jacob prays that night. He goes to the Lord and he says, Lord,
please, you don't let me die. Don't let my brother kill me. And Jacob, he appeals to the Lord because Jacob had this agreement with the Lord. The Lord had said, "Hey, look, your family dysfunctional and you're splitting apart from one another, but your offspring, the offspring of Jacob, is going to be as numerous as there are grains of sand on a beach." And so just think about how much sand there is on a beach. The Lord had said, "You will have, numerous offspring. Your lineage is gonna go on for generations." And so Jacob is appealing to the Lord, saying, "Lord, please, you can't kill me. You can't let me die because you owe me, all these kids. I have to be here to facilitate my lineage. You said you would, make my offspring incredibly numerous. I have to be there for that." And so he's pleading with the Lord out of fear. And that night, Jacob goes to bed. He lays down in his tent, and he is described as having a restless night. And I think at first glance, we all assume it's more or less, kind of the common instance of that because we've all had restless nights. I myself, whether or not I'm thinking of my family or my job, you know, I've had nights where my mind will just think itself crazy, and I'm tossing and I'm turning and I can't get to sleep. No matter how much I try, no matter how much I know I need to go to sleep, I just can't. I think myself crazy or I have too much caffeine, too close to bedtime, and I can't fall asleep. And we've all been there. We've all been there before. And frankly, we're all going to be there again too at some point. And so you could assume that Jacob is going through his version of that because he's fearful of his brother. He's pleading to the Lord, and so he might be filled with a lot of anxiety that's preventing him from going to sleep. Well, actually, as we read throughout the chapter, this restlessness is not just the mental side of it, it's actually physical, because in chapter 32, it describes how this figure, this unnamed individual, this person, enters Jacob's tent, and they have this prolonged wrestling match, this real physical wrestling match that goes throughout the entirety of the night. And so Jacob is wrestling with this person. He doesn't know who he is, and he has a face that he cannot recognize. And there's something strange about this individual because they're able to wrestle continuously for hours and hours on end. So this person has incredible stamina, and then Jacob himself is receiving great stamina, though he himself is incredibly old at this point. And Jacob doesn't recognize his face and whatnot, and so he's gaining that there's some supernatural sense to this individual, this unnamed person. And as they're wrestling throughout the night, there's essentially a stalemate going on. There no one's really gaining a foothold on one another until this individual, pops Jacob's hip joint out of its socket. And so he immobilizes Jacob. And Jacob yields, and he's like, okay, stop, I yield. At least tell me your name. Reveal yourself. Show yourself to me. And the person says, why do you need to know my name? I'm not going to tell you my name. And so Jacob surmises then that this is an angel and that he has been wrestling with a physical embodiment of the Lord, that he himself is wrestling with the Lord, that this angel is on behalf of the Lord, and that Jacob is in this bout with him. And so then Jacob says, okay, if you're not going to tell me who you are, if you're not going to reveal yourself to me, at least give me a blessing, because you just popped my hip out. Please, give me something. And so this individual, this angel, renames Jacob. He says, you're not going to know my name, but I'll give you a new name. And so he renames Jacob to Israel. And Israel, in that context, likely means he who struggles with God. And so Jacob, in wrestling with this angel, is in part wrestling with God, with some embodiment, some representation of the Lord. And this is interesting because this seemingly comes out of nowhere. Because again, in the previous chapters, Jacob is just wandering through the wilderness. He hears that his brother is coming, that they're going to cross paths, and then after his session of prayer, he ends up wrestling with this individual, this angel,
and he describes that as having wrestled with God. And, it's interesting why this is here because, like, again, it just seems so random, but really, Jacob does what we all must do, because in Jacob's weakness and in his fear, Jacob did face the Lord. He faced an ambassador of the Lord, because again, this angel is there on God's behalf. And so Jacob, in this moment of separation from his brother, from feeling all this strife with his family and having appealed to the Lord, not from a position, because you got to think about the context of Jacob's prayer. Jacob prayed to the Lord saying, please don't let him kill me. Please save me. Please spare me. Jacob didn't pray, let my family be reunited. Let bygones be bygones. Let my brother and I embrace. Please just save me. He kind of honestly prayed from a somewhat selfish position, and so I think that had to do with it. I think that the wrestling with this angel that he partook in was meant as a grappling for what's meant to be truly important. It's meant to be a placeholder for what's important. And this whole thing, this whole ordeal, literally went on throughout the night. I just described that it went on until the morning broke, and it was exhausting, and it left him, immobilized because again, the losing his hip joint out of his socket, that wasn't just. It's not like he just popped it back in. No, like Jacob carried on with that crippling for the entirety of his life, and so now after that point, he walked with a limp. You know, So, but it was only after he wrestled with God and he ceased struggling, you know, that he realized like he had kind of a better understanding of things after the fact. Because, like, in the next chapter, in chapter 33, when Jacob and Esau do reconnect, there is a brotherly embrace. Esau doesn't kill him. In fact, he runs up to him and hugs him, so much so that they're falling on top of each other, and you know, they're happy to see each other once again. And I think that in asking for a blessing, in Jacob asking for a blessing, it was a two-pronged blessing, one that not only worked on his heart, his mind, and his body, but also on Esau as well. I think that the blessing that he asked to receive from this angel, that was also, categorized through the knocking out of his hip joint, I think it was meant to say that, like, look, like the body will fail. In fact, your spirits may fail, but by receiving the Lord's blessing, it was able to rekindle family. I think, at least what I'm getting from it this time reading through it, I get the sense that really kind of the goal of this whole thing was to understand that family bonds are incredibly deep, and that they need to be maintained, despite strife and whatnot. And so, yeah, look, like, I think that after that wrestling session, that it changed Jacob's mind, heart, and body, and it changed Esau's mind, heart, and body to the point to where they could reconnect and reunite as brothers. And look, I take my analysis of Scripture for what it's worth. I hope that was at least somewhat concise, but again, I just wanted to share my thoughts on it because, as I said, we're all going to deal with restless nights. We're all going to go through days and nights where we can't sleep for one reason or another. Well, the same can be said for us having to wrestle with the Lord, and I do that all the time. I'm a believer. I'm a Christian. I'm trying to read Scripture. I'm trying to go to church more. But, like, that doesn't mean the Lord and I always have an easy relationship. Like, on one hand, the Lord is this incredibly beautiful, figure, pillar in my life. And on the other hand, he's incredibly frustrating because I don't always understand why things happen the way they do. I don't always know how to respond to his influences on my life, And like just right now, again, at the time of this recording, this is November 17th, holidays are approaching. We've got Thanksgiving and then Christmas and then New Year's. We got this
this three-pronged thing coming at us. And for a lot of people, holidays are great because it's a time of family and coming together and celebrating, you know, you know, that and also, going into a new year. But for myself, it's not, it's really not that anymore. And I don't mean to throw stones at my own family, especially if they're listening. Mom, Dad, if you're listening, and I know that you are, I love you. Thank you for listening. But just being transparent, because I've talked about this before. My my parents got divorced, you know, and in that aftermath, holidays have become incredibly rough and strenuous. I don't always look forward to this time of year, which is sad, but it's just the truth. And again, I don't say that to bring down my parents. I'm saying that just to provide context for myself. And so it was interesting reading this portion of scripture talking about, again, the struggles of brothers and then wrestling with the Lord and what I think the deeper meaning of that all is and how the resolution came to be. Because it went from literally, in one chapter, Esau vows to kill his brother, to the next chapter, they embrace as brothers. And what happened between that was that Jacob wrestled with the Lord in some capacity via this angel. And so I think at some point, I think that we're all going to wrestle with the Lord. I think that we're all going to have him on our hearts and on our minds. And I think that it can become especially persistent during this time of year. And, for those out there who are listening who perhaps struggle with the holidays like I do, know that a sense of togetherness is still important, even if you don't always have that in your core family. You might not always want to see your family, but it's important to keep those relationships alive and intact. And if for some reason or another, if the family unit just isn't meshing, then please look to your friends and lean on your friends and celebrate holidays with them. Not saying you should necessarily exclude your family, but there is kinship that goes beyond your family blood. And there are some friendships that can go incredibly deep and can have incredibly long-lasting roots. And I'm very thankful to have the group of friends that I do that I can, rely on and look to them for, not only friendship and fun, but also guidance and a sense of kinship there as well. And I'm thankful that I can have them throughout the holiday season as well. But yeah, so I hope that this makes sense and that my 2 cents are worth whatever it is. Funny enough, speaking of 2 cents, we lost a penny. Apparently that thing went out of mint. That's kind of interesting. That came suddenly too. We stopped making the penny. Where was that memo? But I digress. But yeah, so again, just reading scripture, it just impacted me differently. So, look, I encourage people to read scripture themselves. I encourage you to read these chapters and to, derive your own conclusion from them. I encourage you to go to church, and I encourage you to get close to your family for the holidays. But again, if you can't, if that's also a point of contention, believe me, I understand. Please don't isolate yourself. Please look to your friends, draw close to them, and then also draw close to the Lord as well. Draw close to him. Please use this time to pray for strength, guidance, that you be slow to anger, that you have a coolness that goes across your mind and your heart. And, I hope that you're able to get some enjoyment out of the holidays and that you can have a good close to this year and a good beginning to the next year. And so, yeah, I just wanted to share my thoughts on some scripture that I've read before many times, but this time around, it just seemingly hit me a little differently. And I just thank you all for listening, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the show. The next thing I want to talk about is Battlefield 6. I've been playing more of that game lately and I love it. The gunplay is fantastic and the modes are great. Conquest, Rush, you name it. Well, in the game, there are two new game modes. One of them is the Battle Royale mode, and the other one is called Gauntlet. And in those modes, there is this voiceover character who just provides intel and updates for you throughout each match. And if you've played the game, you've surely heard him. He says stuff like, capture the objective, or secure the hard drive, or deliver the intel to the drop point. Just stuff like that. And the character's name, if you have subtitles on, which I do, his title is the Handler. And I really like this guy's voice. I don't know who he is, but I think I know who he is. I know who I want him to be. And let me know if you've had similar thoughts yourself. I'm convinced that in the game, the voice of the handler, the voice of the operator that gives us feedback and whatnot, I'm convinced it's Josh Brolin. I don't know why. I have not looked this up. I have no reason to believe that he had any involvement with the development of Battlefield 6, but for some reason, whenever the handler speaks, again saying, 5 enemies remain, or, clear the area, for me, it sounds just like Josh Brolin. And I don't even know if I want to know the true answer behind that, because I just like my version of it where it is Josh Brolin, where it is the voice of Thanos giving me Battlefield intel. I'd hate to Google it and find out it's some guy like, Dan Smith. So for me, I think it's Josh Brolin. I don't know if it is, but I was playing with a friend of mine the other day, and I said, "Hey, man, I think the voiceover guy, he sounds a lot like Josh Brolin." And he was like, "Oh yeah, I never thought about that." The game went on. The handler said some stuff. My friend said that does kind of sound like Josh Brolin. So again, in my conclusion, in my personal headspace, for me, Josh Brolin is a part of Battlefield 6, which makes that game all the more better because he's a phenomenal actor who's played many great roles, such as Thanos from the Marvel movies. And I love the idea of Thanos giving me updates on the game. And so, yeah, um, I hope I'm not alone in this. I don't think I'm alone because Josh Brolin has a very distinct voice, in my opinion. And, the fact that I'm kind of picking up on it consistently throughout the game. Maybe it was him. Who knows? But, yeah, so for me, I like the idea of Josh Brolin feeding me intel on Battlefield. And I wonder if anyone else has had similar ideas. So yeah, comment down below and let me know. But man, Battlefield 6, if you have not tried it out, please do, because that's a lot of fun.
All right, kids, the next thing I want to talk about is a movie I recently saw. My mother and I went out to the theater not long ago to see Now You See Me, Now You Don't, or Now You See Me 3. And funny enough, when we got to the theater, the screening we wanted was actually sold out. The showtime was full. And we did not see Now You See Me 3 that night then. And that's funny because the last time I remember that happening was over a decade ago with a movie called American Assassin back in 2014. And that movie holds a special place in my heart because that is based off a book by a Minnesota author named Vince Flynn. May he rest in peace and live in salvation. But yeah, it's been over a decade since I've shown up to a theater, looking to buy my ticket and whatnot. And then the guy behind the register says, "Sorry, that one is sold out." So good for Now You See Me, and I'll have to catch that one in the future. But yeah, rather than just call it a night, my mom and I went back to her place, and we decided to turn on Apple TV Plus, or Apple TV Plus, as it were. We watched a movie called Wolves, not wolf as in singular, and not wolves as in plural, but wolves. WOLFS, because sure, why not? And this is a movie that my mother and I were actually looking forward to, because I remember when this got announced and was in production, it was coming out. And this is made by Apple, who has a pretty good history of putting their movies in theaters before they dump them straight to streaming. But sadly, Wolves did not make the cut because this thing was going to have a wide theatrical release. And then I remember it was like a week or two before its release date, Apple pulled it and they put it straight to streaming. And it kind of caught my mom and I by surprise because this is a movie that's directed by John Watts, who I believe has made a couple of those Spider-Man movies with Tom Holland. So he's worked with Marvel, one of the biggest names in the business right now. Again, this is by Apple. They have all the money in the world. And this stars Brad Pitt and George Clooney, some of the best actors in the business right now. And yeah, it was just weeks before the film went to theaters that they kind of quickly and quietly pulled it. And because of that, my mom and I missed it. We went on with our lives. We kept going to the theaters for other things, and then we put off Wolves for a long time. And then finally, in the absence of Now You See Me 3, we decided to watch this one. And I'll say this. I like the movie. I did not love it. I did not like it nearly as much as I thought I would. And to be honest, I kind of get why they pulled it. I kind of get why they decided this one shouldn't go to theaters because it's not a bad movie. It's not. I'm just saying I don't think it's what people expected. If you look at the director, the cast, even the trailer, at least for myself, I got a sense that this was going to be kind of a fun romp between Brad Pitt and George Clooney, where they were going to be two kind of smarmy, schlocky, you know, um, hitman adjacent kind of criminal underbelly type stuff. Because in the movie, they both play these kind of cleaner, fixer type people who, if there's a job that needs to get done, but you can't, call the police and you can't call whatever. You call these guys, you call these no-name people who come and they make problems go away, whether that's removing a dead body, destroying evidence, blowing up stuff, and literally throughout the movie, they're literally not given any names. They're just referred to as just like the guys, which is kind of fun and whatnot. But yeah, despite this having a somewhat, at least in presentation, you would think this is kind of a little bit reminiscent of maybe an Ocean's 11 type of approach. This is much more straight and serious. It's not very funny. It's not very action heavy. It's a lot of walking and talking, which, if you're a fan of good performances, go nuts because, again, you have two of the best actors to ever do it playing against one another. But if you're not in on the dialogue and on the story that this thing is trying to tell, you're going to easily check out of this thing quick. And the movie does start slow. It does. And then it kind of finds its footing and gets into a rhythm. It doesn't really pick up throughout the movie. It just kind of keeps this persistent pace. It kind of just jogs along. I will say this, though. I will say this, because this sounds like I'm killing the thing, but I'm not. I'll say this. The movie ends really strong. I think the ending is the best part. I think that the last 20, maybe even 30 minutes are the best. But you kind of have to just push on through the rest of the film to get to this point, because the end is kind of what you all want, where Brad Pitt and George Clooney are kind of in sync. There's a little bit of action, a little more banter, and so on and so forth. But to get there, you got to get through a lot of just whatever. So again, it's not a bad movie. It's not. I liked it. I'm just saying it wasn't what I thought it was going to be. It wasn't what I wanted it to be. And in the end, I kind of get why Apple got cold feet and said, this might not be a big hit. This might not make a very big splash. So do I recommend Wolves? Yeah, I do. But go in with tempered expectations. Funny enough, though, I would watch another one. I really would. I hope that there's another one with these characters because, again, the ending is the best part. It sets up, some pretty cool stuff in the future. But, yeah, Wolves. Looks great, well acted, but just slow. Slow is the way I would describe it. So, yeah, check it out if you want to. But Apple, please, if you're listening, and I know that you are, keep putting your stuff to theaters. My mom and I want to go out to the movies together. Staying at home, watching stuff, yeah, it's fine. Sure, cool, whatever. But going out, going to the movies, having a night of it, come on. So, But yeah, anyway, Wolves. Good, not great. Check it out if you want, or don't. But, yeah. And the last thing I want to talk about, kids, is the state of my Minnesota Vikings. Because, again, at the time of this recording, it is now Monday the 17th, and the Vikings recently played on Monday, no, excuse me, on Sunday, the 16th, they played the Chicago Bears, Dub Bears, and the Vikings lost 19-17. This was a home game too, so we lost to the Bears at home. And yeah, this game was not pretty. And by my assessment, this was absolutely a very winnable game. We should have had this one in the bag. And I know people are going to both rightly and wrongly pin this entirely on our QB, J.J. McCarthy. But for me, this is not just a one-trick pony. Like, I think that there were a lot of shenanigans going on with this game. First of all, the Bears themselves, Chicago is proving to be a feisty competitor. They have a pretty solid record, and their QB, Caleb Williams, he's proving to be mobile and slippery. Like, we could not get him down. The Vikings could not sack him. He was rolling left and right and breaking tackles and all that stuff. And so, look, is Williams, Hall of Fame, top 10 type stuff? No. But is he a good threat? Yeah, he is. But he still has some issues as well. He himself was sailing a few passes, but man, we could not get him down when it counted. And so, yeah, the Bears are proving to be a tougher opponent than I think anyone realized, especially when you look back to the start of the season and the Vikings beat the Bears, in week 1 of the season. So there's that. But then you look to the Vikings themselves, and J.J. McCarthy is proving to be an interesting case study for the Vikings because he's overthrowing passes, he's throwing them too short, he's throwing interceptions, so on and so forth. And he himself is trying to be mobile, but he still kind of needs to get into that rhythm. But I'm not pinning this fully on McCarthy because I think that there were issues that go just beyond the QB. Yes, he's the one, driving the car and throwing the ball and whatnot. But like looking at the team as a whole, like I said, we could not sack Caleb Williams to save his life, or to save our lives, excuse me. And also J.J. McCarthy was throwing good passes, and there were plenty of times where the ball bounced out of the hands of the wide receivers. Aaron Jones dropped a pass. Justin Jefferson, one of the best in the league to ever do it, he dropped a pass. Addison, Hawkinson, you name it. There were lots of balls that were just bouncing around in people's mitts. Now, is some of that on the QB? Of course. You have to throw accurate. You have to throw precisely with enough spin, not too fast, not too slow, not too soft, not too hard. You have to throw arguably a perfect pass to be caught. But like you look at these wide receivers, these aren't some slappies. Again, Justin Jefferson, one of the best in the business. He himself has said he can catch anything, and I've seen him catch anything. The dude can catch with one hand when he's double coverage. Then you look at Jordan Addison, our wide receiver number 2, who if he wasn't on the Vikings, he'd be the number 1 on a bevy of other teams. So he's great. You got Hawkinson, who's a veteran. You got Adam Thielen, who's a veteran. And Aaron Jones, who's also a veteran as well. Many times, though, they were just dropping passes. Now, of course, I understand everyone's human. Everyone has a bad day at the office. But, for me, I saw more dropped passes than I did inaccurate balls thrown. And so, for me, honestly, J.J. McCarthy is not solely to blame for this loss. He's to blame somewhat. He is maybe even 40%, but he's not over 50 in my opinion. And look, when it comes to J.J. McCarthy, he's my quarterback. He is. If you've listened to the podcast before, you know my history with him. If you haven't, well, then here you go. I was there at U.S. Bank Stadium when the Vikings drafted McCarthy. I was there when the announcement got made that we were trading up, and I was there when we selected him, and the place went freaking bananas. There were cheers, fireworks, the skull chant, you name it. There was energy in that room because this was meant to be the start of the future for the franchise. We got our QB in the first round, something we've never done before. And look, you can debate, and honestly, I will absolutely hear this argument because I think there's some truth to it. J.J. McCarthy was not our first pick. In fact, he might not have even been the second or the third. I have come to believe, I've heard rumors, that our first pick was Drake May. That's who the Vikings wanted. The Patriots sniped him away from us and then went Michael Penix and so on and so forth. And I'm not saying we were left with J.J. McCarthy, but he was not my first pick, and I don't think he was the first pick of our coach, Kevin O'Connell. I don't think he
he is the person who we thought we got to get him above everybody else. That being said, we still got our first round QB. J.J. McCarthy is still a talent, but it's been a rocky road because his first year in the NFL, he gets hurt preseason. He sits out the whole year. So his first year, he's on the sideline watching film, studying, trying to be one of the boys, hype up his team and whatnot, but he's not being a QB. Well, then now, this year technically number two, is really only his first true year of being an actual player on the field. Yes, he played in preseason before, but this is where he's really cutting his teeth. And so I don't expect perfection. And you can call me a shill or a defender or whatever, but I wish people also wouldn't expect perfection out of him. I don't expect him to be Patrick Mahomes, Josh Allen, Aaron Rodgers, Baker Mayfield. I don't expect that kind of performance from him. We've seen flashes where I think he has that ability and that talent, but it's going to take time to develop. And I would really encourage people to view this year as year one for him. Yes, I understand we lost a year with him being injured, and the contract does not care whether or not he plays or not. A year is a year. So, that is time lost. But I'm just saying this kid, McCarthy, he doesn't even have a full, 16 game season under his belt. This is what, his fourth game, fifth game? Because he's been injured this year as well, and we had to call in Carson Wentz for a bit. Hey Carson, how you doing? God bless you, but like he had to drive the car for a bit too. So McCarthy has been rattled around. He's had a tough go of it so far, and for him to not play at an elite level, I get it, I do. But he is my quarterback. He's my quarterback. I was there when he was drafted. I have this is going to sound so cheesy and corny, but I mean this sincerely. I have a connection to him because I was there for team history. You know, doesn't matter if he plays 2 years in the NFL or 20. You know, when I look back through history, I will say I was there when he was drafted. I was there when he became a Viking. I was there when we thought history was, just being written, where this is it. He's now going to lead our franchise for the next 5 to 10 years and get us our first Super Bowl and then more to come. Like, I will look back on McCarthy with incredible fondness, even if he is a quote unquote bust. But I think it's too early to call it that because the kid just doesn't have the reps in. He doesn't have the time. He needs to get that. And I pray to God that if anyone from the Vikings is listening, and I know that they are, I hope that despite the season not going as planned, and despite McCarthy not playing as planned, that you keep putting him out there, that you keep getting him reps. He needs time on the field to understand the system, to understand what it's like to be a real QB, and all that jazz. Is he injury prone? Maybe. But we won't know until we test him. So please, please, if this season is quote unquote done, and right now the Vikings, I believe, sit at 4-6, we are not in playoff contention unless we go on some incredible run and other teams also lose in our wake as well. We're not going to go very far in the postseason. But even if that's the case, even if this season is quote unquote done, get him out there, start him, see what he can do. We have to get him time because if we bench him, we start in, Max Brosner, God bless him, then, we're going to be in the same situation to where we're now going into the 2026 season not knowing what McCarthy can do. And so McCarthy simply needs time on the field with the ball with the guys. But I mean this sincerely. I really think people need to chill out on him. I think people need to stop being so hard on him. I'm not throwing in the towel on him. I'm not selling my stock on him, and I don't think you should as well. I think that he's a young guy, he's a young QB, and I truly believe that the future is bright. I think if he can get developed and gets time inside of the organization, inside the system, I think he can be a true, genuine talent. And I mean, even look at Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen as well, the stars of their respective teams. They weren't popping off year one. It took them, 2+ years to get to where they are, and now they're some of the best to ever do it. They're both arguably the best in the whole league, and so please, Please, kids, just simmer, simmer. Purple rain will come, but it's going to take some time. But look, I'm invested in this team, and I'm invested in McCarthy, and I'm here for it, man. He he's my quarterback. He is. I ride with nine. I ride with nine. I'm all in, baby. So yeah, I hope you stick around, and I hope you're here for the J.J. McCarthy experience because I think it's going to be a good one. But yeah, I know it hurts. I know it hurts right now in the aftermath of losing a game and us not being in the playoff contention, and J.J. McCarthy's not looking like Tom Brady. I get it, but please trust the process. He'll get there. He will get there. I'm confident. So yeah, just keep the faith, baby. Keep the purple faith, as it were, and then eventually more purple rain will come. But that's gonna do it for this episode of the Far Out Podcast. Thank you so much for listening. Hope you have a good rest of your day. Hope you have a good night, and I'll see you in the next one. All right, bye bye.